Hello and welcome to today's webinar on awareness and embodiment practices for nervous system regulation. I'm Amy and I'll be facilitating the session today. I'd like to begin with some housekeeping. So this session is really designed to be paced, so you can break it down into bite-sized chunks. By this you can press pause whenever you'd like to and return to the session at another time. Please honour your energy levels and your experience whenever you're watching this, and do take those pauses, do break it down in a way that works best for you. So the fundamental principle of this session is that I'd like to invite you to really look after yourself, so really take care of yourself and how you take in this information. So feel free to move around throughout this practice. It is all about embodiment after all, so we're not in school mode, looking forward at the screen and not moving. You can go out for a walk, you can lay down. You may prefer to have this solely as an audio, and that can work as well. So you can have this as an audio rather than watching it as a video. And take some time to absorb the information and see how that feels. I have recorded this as a pre-recorded session so that it can be paced and broken down for people, but I will follow up this session with a live Zoom call where you can ask questions and we can discuss things. So please keep an eye out for details of this, or if you'd prefer, you can email me questions and I can answer these in the session, so you don't have to ask them in the session yourself if you prefer to email those beforehand. That information will all be shared and hopefully in a way that can work best for you. So I thought we'd begin by really getting into the body a little. So everything in this session is completely optional. So you don't have to do any of these exercises, it's completely up to you, you're in charge. If you would like to give them a go, then feel free to calibrate them to wherever you are today. So you might wish to do a little bit, you might wish to do all of it. Again, the choice is yours. Please take responsibility for your experience and please really honour where you're at. So to begin, would you like to notice how your feet are feeling against the ground? This can be done in standing, it can be done if you're lying down. You might notice that the heels or the sides of the feet meet the bed or the ground, so any firm surface beneath you. And can you take a nice sigh out through the mouth, sighing out the exhale. And taking a couple more of those. And in this moment, I'd like to invite you to check in with how you feel. Seeing if you can gently turn towards this with curiosity. So not judging the experience, noticing. And can you see if you can stay with this at a sensory level? So noticing what you feel in your body, any sensations, any messages that are coming up. So what's your body communicating to you? Maybe it's saying something about your energy levels through sensations in the body. Maybe single words pop up. Can you see if you can stay away from any narratives about your experience? So these could be stories such as I'm tired because I overdid things today, or I feel pain because I did some gardening yesterday or last week, those types of things. So staying with the physical experience, noticing what we feel, noticing sensations. If that feels too much at any point, you may wish to notice what you can smell, what you can hear. So getting a sense of how you are through the body. And once you have that sense of how you are in this moment, would you like to check in with your hands, noticing what they're doing, So is there any tensing or gripping of the hands? Can you see if you can soften any tensing? So letting the fingers lightly uncurl, the palms unclench. Can you rest your tongue behind your lower front teeth? This might sound a little bit strange, but you may notice how this releases your jaw. And then can you soften your belly by letting it really hang loose? So we're not holding our bellies in, we're letting them relax and grow as much as they'd like. And from here, you might wish to sigh out your out breath through the mouth once more. So taking another check-in here with how you're feeling now. Noticing if this has created any little changes or not in your current state. Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. Can you notice? And if you found that you closed your eyes through that, would you like to gently open them, take a little look around your surroundings, and preparing to bring your attention back to the webinar. So once more, thank you for joining me today. I'll begin with an introduction. So my name is Amy and I'm an embodiment coach, a yoga teacher and a mindfulness meditation facilitator. And I appreciate that all of that is a bit of a mouthful and you may be thinking, well, what exactly does that mean? What does it entail? So the very heart of my work is really around the two principles of awareness and then choice. So it's using different techniques, different practices to really become aware of ourselves, how we are in each and every moment, how we relate to others and the world around us, how we relate to ourselves, and also how our ways of being are expressed through our bodies and how we do this expression through our body. And this may sound a little bit esoteric. You might be thinking, oh, what do I mean by that? But we can get quite practical here. So if I invited you to think about a time when you, say, felt nervous, if I asked you to think about what your body does when you feel nervous, each and every one of us would have a set description of what that feels like. So for some people, it may be that we feel our heart race, or we feel a knot in the belly, we feel our jaw clench, our hands tense. It may feel that our mind is racing. Everyone's patterns, whilst there's many commonalities, can be quite unique. And we can find this as an expression through every emotion and every state that we're in as well. So our posture can tell us so much about ourselves and our current state, and the way we do things can also unveil so many of our habits and our patterns that come through in all aspects of life. So we can look at this through an example such as, do we find ourselves rushing through certain movement patterns? So how do we walk? What's our relationship with following other people? And there's many different things that we can explore through the body and really work into this deeper awareness of ourselves and how we interact with the world, how we are, and also our felt state. So what our felt state is, and we may have lots of particular states that we return to that are habits that feel familiar to us, and then there may be certain ones that are provoked through various circumstances. So this is all the awareness piece. When we then move into choice, so once we have awareness of how we are, and I really focus on turning towards this with compassion, so really being kind to ourselves, not beating ourselves up, and there's some great benefits to this and the way that we live, which I can come on to later in this webinar, sorry. But when we then start looking at choices, so when we have awareness, we have knowledge. So we know what's an automation, what's a habit, and we can choose to start doing something differently. So with choices, we can explore different embodiments, which can translate again to different ways to be. So different ways to be and to feel and to relate in the world. A practical example that I like to give people of this is, have you ever had a time where you say had to do something that feels at a physical level very uncomfortable, but you cognitively know it to be true? So it may be a time where you've needed to say no to something, and you've gone ahead, you've said no to something, you've done what your brain is telling you to do. You know that you've been very reasonable about that, but you might have feelings of, say, guilt or unease in the body after that, and you can't quite reconcile the body and the mind. Similarly, you may need to make a presentation, say at work, and your brain may be thinking, this is okay, this is fine, you know, what could go wrong? Yet your body is reacting in a very visceral way, so there can be a lot of nerves, and this might come across in your tone of voice when you're speaking. It may be expressed through things such as shaking hands or a feeling of nausea in the stomach. So there's this disconnect between the body and the mind. So with embodiment work, we're really working with the person as a whole, and we'll look at embodying new choices. And this is deeply powerful and deeply transformational. So where we can bring these new options into our daily life. And there can be lots of rhetoric around the mind influencing the body, but there's also a lot of work around the body influencing the mind. So this is something that could be called a bottom-up approach. So bottom-up is influencing our state of being through the body, and top-down can be thought of as influencing our whole being through the mind. And there's lots of benefits of both sides of things, but with embodiment work, we're really working on accessing these new options, these new ways of being through the body. And a very central part of that is how we work with the nervous system and how we can better regulate our nervous system to allow us to access these different options in life. And when we regulate the nervous system as well, there's also lots of practices that we can do to help bring us into a more conducive state for relaxation, restoration and healing, particularly when we're experiencing pain or fatigue. So when we're in persistent pain or fatigue states, then it can be thought of that the body is really stuck in an activated state. So things are heightened, we're stuck in a very activated state, and we may be experiencing sensations in the body, symptoms through this state of activation. So I'm going to pause briefly for a moment here and invite you to check in. So I'm also going to use this as an example, just as a bit of time, just to flip through my note cards. And do check in with yourself. So would you like to listen to more of the session now, or would you like to hit pause for a little while? So it's completely up to you. Please honour your experience, and you can come back to this when it feels right for you. So yes, so just to wrap up this introduction, you may be thinking, so how does this relate to mindfulness meditation and to yoga practices? So I really like to see the three pieces of my work, so the embodiment coaching, teaching movement and also teaching mindfulness meditation, almost as three parts of a whole. So there's very specific practices that come from the mindfulness and the yoga and somatics traditions, which I really blend in my approach. And you can have these as standalone sessions that you do once a day, a couple of times a week, occasionally, those types of things. And then the embodiment coaching can really be the integration piece, which is how do we access tools that can really be brought into our everyday life, that we can use to benefit us, and that we can do without having to roll out a yoga mat or sit on a cushion, that we don't need 30 minutes to be away from people from. So very practical tools and techniques that we can bring into our life when we're in the midst of a flare and we want to calm our system down to reduce our symptoms, or when we're, say, in a meeting or having a difficult conversation with someone and we want to calm and centre ourselves so that we can best communicate and best relate to that person and not get quite so caught in our habitual patterns, which may or may not be serving us. So I'd now like to talk about the stress response in the body. So coming into a little bit of our physiology. So stress in itself is not a bad thing, and this can sound a little counterintuitive. So stress gets a really bad rep, and the term stress itself can feel quite loaded. There can be a lot of stigma around it, particularly in the modern age. Whereas stress itself, by definition, is it's more a describer of something that is activating. And stress itself, the stress response, is designed to be a protective mechanism. So it's our system's way of protecting us. We can think about it as an alarm system that's alerting us to danger, and it's giving us tools to help avoid danger. So this can be thought of as the traditionally known fight or flight system. It can be known as fight, flight or freeze. And there's a lot of nuances around this, but this is the basic model that we're working with. So the stress system is designed to be activated in sharp bursts. So whilst we've evolved to the modern day and age, our nervous system, its design is still very much rooted in our ancestral counterparts. So think our caveman, distant relatives throughout the ages, and their lifestyle. So stress was activated there when people were maybe fleeing from wild animals, or they needed a burst of energy to ensure that they could build enough shelter to survive the night. So even though our world has changed so much, the stress response hasn't actually adapted to the modern world. And much of what is currently experienced as stress is what the medical profession deems psychosocial stress. So each and every one of us has a stress load. And different models give lovely visuals for this in a different way. So you may have heard about a stress bucket, and you can think about this through a variety of means. So thinking about a container. So we all have an individual container, and different stresses are added into this at various points in life. And the stress load that we all carry is completely holistic, and by this I mean it comes through all different aspects of our life and our circumstances. So our physical health, an infection or a virus can very much be a stressor that goes into our stress bucket or becomes part of our stress load. So this is something that we're carrying with us. So viral infections may be an injury that's happened that may or may not have healed at this point in time. We can also then broaden this out, so the demands of a heavy workload can very much be a stressor. Financial insecurity, change, relationship breakdown, parenting, and we often think that stresses are very negative things, things that don't bring us joy, things that we need to get rid of, and that's not the case. So something can be something that we incredibly love, something that we're very, very passionate about, yet it can still be a stressor because it's activating to our system. It's a demand on our being. So even though we may love our children, we may be incredibly passionate about our jobs, if there is a lot of demand there and it's creating a lot of activation, which in many cases that can be, it is creating a stressor. So it's part of our stress load and something to consider within that. Living with pain and fatigue is a stressor in itself alongside the physical symptoms. It can have a myriad of effects and implications throughout our entire life. Past trauma, so this may be something that may be rooted all the way back into childhood, but something that hasn't been resolved, then that lives with us, and that's really stored in the body and something that comes into our present everyday stress load. There's also certain personality patterns that can contribute to this as well. So none of these are a judgment at all. We all have different patterns and they all have positives and negatives about them. But if we're someone that identifies as being an achiever, so someone that maybe always goes the extra mile, puts quite a lot of pressure on ourselves to do well, or has high expectations of ourselves, then this personality trait, this pattern, can be quite a heavy stressor on the system itself. Similarly, if we really identify as being someone that helps other people a lot, so we go out of our way and maybe put other people's needs before our own, then we can develop patterns here where we're also creating a lot of stress on our system. So we may be denying our own needs or putting other people's needs on top of our own, or repressing certain emotions, which isn't healthy for the system. Having an anxious disposition, so having a lot of worry around the world, again, whilst understandable, this isn't a judgment at all, but this can create a lot of stress on the body. So we become quite activated through this anxious state, through this hypervigilant state often, where we're looking for negatives in life, where we're looking out for stresses, and our body responds accordingly. So all these things are going into our individual stress load. And I've briefly talked about trauma as well, and again, this can be a really key aspect of this, and I use the term trauma very broadly. So there's all different types of trauma, from things that we instinctively identify as traumatic events, so say a car accident, war, grief, these types of things, but also there can be lower level traumas, or what was often called small t trauma. So this can be emotional distress, often from childhood, or certain patterns or levels of chronic stress that we've experienced through life. So we really want to look at trauma as this very wide spectrum that impacts all of us. We don't want to pathologise as such, but to recognise what our histories and our living everyday embodied beings are expressing around what's happened to us. So all these things and much more build up our individual stress load. So I'll take another pause here, and you may wish to pause the video and again take some time to absorb this information. You may wish to reflect on your current stress load, so perhaps scribbling down a few things that come to mind when you reflect on what could be current stresses in your life, or what things might be impacting you. What could you think is going into your container? And often when we find ourselves being overwhelmed or moving into, say, flares or symptoms of fatigue, of stress, or what we commonly know as stress, so stress-related dis-ease, and I use that as two words, so a state that is less than optimal. It can be that our stress load has become too full, that it's overflowing. So we'll always have some forms of stress in our life, and we can handle so much, but there might be particular times where too much has gone into our container at once, where our load is tipping over as such. So you may find it helpful to reflect on this and notice what your stresses are in life. So taking that pause if that's helpful. If you would like to keep going at this point, or if you're staying with me here, then I'd invite you to check in with how your feet feel against the ground once more. And also noticing how your sit bones are in the chair if you're sitting down. So the sit bones are sort of the bony bits at the base of the pelvis, the bits that we notice against the chair when we're sitting there. And can you get interested in how your body feels? Are there any sensations that are going on? Do you find yourself leaning a little bit forward towards the webinar, the screen, if you're watching me? Or do you find yourself leaning back? Maybe you feel quite fidgety. Can you notice your pattern at this point? So once you've identified that, I'd like to invite you to become aware of the space behind you, the space in front of you, and the spaces to the sides of you. So having equal awareness of this 360-degree space around you. And noticing how that impacts your posture. And would you like to raise your shoulders up towards your ears? And then let that go with a sigh breath out through the mouth. And one more time if that feels all right for you. And then taking a few little movements. You may wish to yawn or stretch. You may want to walk around at this point. So thank you. So picking up around the design of the nervous system. So the nervous system really works below language. So our sense of safety is assessed by the reptilian part of the brain, which is much older than the prefrontal cortex, so the part that works around language and conscious thought. So our sense of safety is a very subconscious process, and this is what the nervous system responds to. So using that analogy of the alarm system, it's constantly detecting threats in our environment or in our felt state. And we really want to turn towards this, and having this knowledge that this is how the nervous system works gives us quite a lot of power. So often telling ourselves to calm down, which I don't know, you can let me know in the feedback, isn't always so helpful. So if it was as easy as that, then the world would be a very different place, I think. But the body really needs these cues of safety. It really needs a felt sense of safety to relax. And by safety, it means that we're not perceiving these threats. So these threats from our environment, which again, if we think about the modern day age, it might not be fleeing from wild animals, something that the nervous system was originally designed to detect, but it might be the threat of, say a confrontational email that we're not looking forward to that comes through at 11 p.m. at night, and we've had a steady trickle of stress throughout the day. So the stress response is quite powerful. It releases a physiological process in the body, so lots of hormones and chemicals are released, and in short, sharp bursts it is helpful. So we get hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that can give us lots of strength, lots of power. So again, thinking about, this design, we could have a better chance of outrunning a wild animal with cortisol and adrenaline pumping through our system. Our focus narrows, so we're not thinking about, what we're going to eat later, what our grocery shopping is, whilst we're trying to run away from a wild animal, say. So there's a big impact of the activation, the stress response, which is sometimes called the sympathetic nervous system as well, when this is triggered, when this is activated. And this can be helpful in these small doses. It can become insidious and quite damaging, however, when we are activated in an ongoing way. So something that we can call chronic stress. So it can be a lot of low-level stresses, but we're not having appropriate time for recovery and recalibration. So it could be working a very demanding job, not having rest from that, so lots of low-level stresses, and our system is constantly activated. We're pumping out those chemicals, we're not coming out of that state. And then, say, going home and other stresses coming out, having certain things going on in our internal experience that impact how we perceive the world, how we relate to others. So when we start to get this idea, this concept of how the nervous system works, we can see that we're not working with our natural design in the modern age. So modern society is often promoting go, 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 and this doesn't honour our natural rhythms and how the body works. So when we find that we're constantly activated, this can become quite damaging. The body isn't designed to be pumping out these chemicals all of the time. It can be very draining, very demanding for the body. We can also find that our focus becomes very narrow, so we can't see things quite as creatively. We don't open ourselves up for connection, what can be known as social engagement with other people, which again is very soothing, very relaxing for the nervous system. And with many pain and fatigue conditions, when we are in a very heightened state of dysregulation, the nervous system can become quite dialed up, and we can find ourselves coming into crashes. So we may be moving between states where we feel quite wired, there's a lot going on, and then the point where we feel that we've got no energy at all. So we can be moving in and out of these different states. So it can be quite an interesting yet complex area. However, we can use these key principles to think about, well, okay, how does my nervous system work? You know, what is that design as we'd approach many things? And how can I create the right conditions for my nervous system to operate as optimally as possible? So those are quite big questions, and as with all things in life, we don't have complete control, and a life with no stress isn't something that's possible, I believe. And also, avoiding stress completely isn't the answer. It's more developing a more healthy set of self-regulation tools and making any appropriate lifestyle changes, or working with our current patterns, our habits, to help reduce stress and take away stress that can be avoided, and then having tools at our disposal to help our bodies recalibrate, come out of that heightened activated state and into a more restful state where we can recover. So a healthy nervous system isn't one that stays constantly relaxed, but it's one that can move in and out of different states at different points, and it can access these easily, and the body can recover in between these states. So, how do awareness and embodiment-based practices help? So there's a lot of similarities between Buddhist thought, modern psychology, and also medical pain science and the emerging field of psychoneuroimmunology, which could be thought of as a holistic approach to health. So we're thinking about psychology, the brain, how we think, and then neuro, so thinking about the brain, thinking about neuroscience, and then immunology is thinking about the immune system. And holistic practices have traditionally always viewed the person as a whole and always seen these things not as so separate. So they're constantly playing, and they impact each other as well. So when we're looking at recovery and helping ourselves into more healthier states of regulation, lots of little things can really support us in our recovery, and it's very rarely one single thing that will, sort of give us a healthy nervous system or get rid of our pain and fatigue symptoms. It's lots of different tools and techniques, and I really approach this as something that needs to be personalised to each and every person. So each of us have a number of contributing factors that have led us towards fatigue, burnout, stress or physical pain. And we all have this holistic picture, and we all have different things that work for us in our means of recovering and of helping our systems recalibrate. Therefore, we need support that looks at these different areas and views us as individuals. So we're using the mind, body and our energy as a whole system to signal to our whole being that we are safe. So we're working on that reptilian level of the brain, below language, so signalling to the body, to the mind, that things are okay and we can move into a more relaxed state, or the parasympathetic nervous system as it is known. And this is the state that is conducive to healing. So immunity and digestion all work more optimally here, and these areas are all compromised when we're in a chronically stressed state, or this could be called the sympathetic nervous system. And we can also move into what can be called hyperarousal, which is excess arousal. So some symptoms of this can be that feeling of feeling tired but wired. It could be feeling panic, various different things. There's also a state called hypoarousal, and this can be a state where we feel a little bit shut down, or we're feeling that we're quite numb. And often we can think about this, that the hypo comes after the hyper. So we can run these systems that are very energy draining, so experiencing this chronic stress, and then we may move into another state where we start feeling numb or shut down. And we may alternate between the two of these, whereas we want to optimally work to come into the parasympathetic nervous system, so the state that's also known as the rest and digest place, so where we can restore, where we can recalibrate. And over time, when we develop our practices, our tools for self-regulation, we can also start to reduce our resting baseline. So we all have a resting baseline, and if we have a pain or a fatigue condition, this may be higher than optimal or higher than we would like it to be. So we can work over time with reducing that resting baseline, so bringing it down into this parasympathetic state where restoration can occur. So again, we're working really gently, really gradually with the body over time. So I shall leave this here for today. There's so much that I could talk about on this topic, but my hope is to really offer today's webinar as an introduction. So something to give you a little bit of food for thought, and to introduce you to this topic of the nervous system, and to hopefully give you some hope that there are things that can be done to develop healthier self-regulation, very practical tools and techniques that are done through the body to help us access different states and for us to explore different ways to be, so different ways to think and feel and to relate, and to not underestimate the body, so to not cut ourselves into two, thinking mind and body, or the mind leading everything and the body following along, but to really open ourselves up to exploring the wisdom of the body and how this can help us in our journeys. So to wrap up, I thought we'd finish with an awareness and embodiment practice, and this is designed to help release a little bit of tension in your neck, but my invitation, as always, is to not take my word for it, but see how it feels for you. So if you would like to give this a try, I'd like to invite you to sit down, or you can stand if you prefer, and connect to how your feet feel against that firm support of the ground beneath you. And in your mind's eye, can you now get a sense of where your left ear is in relationship to your left shoulder? Can you map that space in your mind's eye? And then can you repeat this? So mapping the distance between the right ear and the right shoulder. Getting a feel for that. And we're working with the felt sense here. So what does it feel like? And then on an exhale, would you like to take your left ear towards your left shoulder? And keeping the breath flowing nice and freely, would you now like to lift the right shoulder towards the right ear, just a couple of centimetres, and then relax it back down. And just repeating that a few times so we get a little wiggle. Can you stay with the sensation of how this feels down the side of the neck, maybe into the collarbones and even into the upper back? Keeping the breath flowing freely. And then letting that go. And on an inhale, slowly returning the head to centre. And in your mind's eye, can you remap that distance between the right ear and the right shoulder? Noticing if this feels the same or any different to how it did before we did this little movement. And then on another exhale, taking your left ear towards your left shoulder again. And this time, raising that left shoulder towards the left ear and resting it back down. So again, it becomes this little shimmy. Noticing how all this feels in the body. So where do the sensations move to? Where can you feel the movement? And can you try and use as little effort as possible so that the movement feels really comfortable, really easy. And letting that go and returning the head to centre on an inhale. And remapping that distance between each ear and each shoulder, again in your mind's eye. So on your next exhale, would you like to take your right ear towards your right shoulder? And then lifting your left shoulder towards your left ear and relaxing that back down. Starting that soft movement. Staying with the sensation. Noticing if this side feels different to the other. All whilst trying not to judge this. And letting that go. Inhaling back up to centre. And then exhaling, taking the right ear towards the right shoulder again. And lifting the right ear up, letting that go. The right shoulder, sorry, not the right ear. And just having that little movement, staying with those sensations. And then bringing the head back up to centre. So for our final exploration, if you'd like to take the right ear towards the right shoulder on an exhale again. And this time, can you seesaw the shoulders? So one rests and one lifts, and then we reverse that. Keeping the movement really small, gentle and easy. So we're not straining. And we're not pulling the shoulder blades down. We're resting the shoulders back to their neutral start position. letting that go and bringing the head back to centre. And then on an exhale, taking the left ear towards the left shoulder and seesawing those shoulders again. Breath flowing naturally. Letting that go and then bringing the head to centre. And taking a final inventory, noticing where our left ear feels in relationship to our left shoulder blade in our mind's eye. So what's that distance like? And then repeating that on the right hand side. What's it like there? Does it feel the same or different to how it did at the start of the practice? And then if you'd like to finish by gently sighing out your out-breath through the mouth, letting your belly hang loose. And taking a final moment to check in with how you are. And as I mentioned, do feel free to note down, maybe if it's an aid memoir to yourself, any questions that you've had from this webinar. And do get in touch, do send those through to me. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this information was helpful. And do keep in touch. So keep in touch by email or via my Instagram account, where I share lots more information around these topics. So hopefully today was a bit of a taster, a bit of an information share about the nervous system and how we can use awareness and embodiment-based practices to better support its regulation. So thank you so much.